Hello, my name is Dr. Stephen Critchlow. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I've also been a church pastor. And I'm looking at the problem of suffering. And in particular, recently, I've been looking at the impact of love on suffering. And one book which was written, which I think is very important, by C.S. Lewis, is called The Four Loves. And in this book, Lewis is discussing four different kinds of love and the way those four kinds of love can be seen. You see, the English language is a little bit weak when it comes to describing love. It's a one word in the English. But in the Greek, there are four words, and they describe different kinds of love. And one of the first kinds of love is a word called storge, which means love in the family. You see, love in the family is very, very important. In these days, with a climbing divorce rate, in all kinds of difficulties, the family is really, really under pressure. And the love and care that a child might experience from its parents is often lacking. And that is a problem in a child's development. And you see, if a child doesn't receive love and care, then that child is, in a sense, deprived of something special. And we know the first 3 years in life are particularly important because that is when those kind of deep internal relationships are laid down with its parents. And if that's lacking, then there can be a struggle. One man who was a famous hymn writer was called William Calper. And he, unfortunately and sadly, lost his mother as a young child. And as a result of losing the mother, he was, in a sense, deprived. And at the age of 32, he went through a tremendous crisis in his life. He, in fact, decided to take his own life, and he asked a cabbie driver to drive him round and drive him to the River Thames. But it was a very, very foggy night, and the cab driver got lost, and he ended up where he started off from an hour later. He then tried to kill himself with a knife, and the knife broke. He tried to hang himself, but he was cut down, still unconscious. You see, God had his hand in some way on this man's life. And he wrote famous hymns because he was very clever indeed, very intelligent. And he wrote this, he says, "Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head." And one of the messages I give in the talks I give on suicide is basically intense suicidal thoughts and feelings are often pretty short-lived. If you get somebody through a crisis, then you can save lives. And that's an important takeaway message that has really not a lot to do with what we're talking about at present, but you can catch up on some of that later. But what I'm saying is the first few years of life are extremely important. C.S. Lewis also lost his mother when he was quite young, and he described that in a very picturesque way by basically saying Atlantis has sunk, all was sea. It was sea and islands now. Atlantis had sunk. And what he's describing is, of course, mythical Atlantis was the continent in the middle of the Atlantic. And he's saying it had sunk and just left was sea and islands. In other words, he was talking about the devastation he felt in his life because of the loss of his mother. Of course, there are answers to some of these things. Answers that aren't always easy to find or easy to access, but there are answers. For example, psychotherapy in its different forms can be a real help in undoing some of those problems in childhood that we might have experienced, and the different kinds of ways of doing that. Trauma-based therapy is sometimes very useful with different techniques such as trauma-based cognitive behavior therapy and eye movement desensitization, reprogramming. All of those ways are very helpful, as well as straightforward psychotherapy. Also, Christian prayer ministry is very, very valuable in getting to the roots of some of these problems and bringing people into the sense of love and acceptance through Christ. Some of those things can undo the problems of childhood, but as we say sometimes, the child is the father of the man, and sometimes the problems of childhood can continue. And if we feel perhaps that we've never experienced much of a sense of well done or praise in our early life, that can affect us, and we can sometimes struggle against that by trying to overperform, or we can instead retreat and feel sad and miserable and go under as a result of that lack of affirmation. And of course, in the Second World War and shortly after that, men had been through that, and their desire was that young children should be brought up to be tough and strong, and sometimes that lack of affirmation could have affected people. The beautiful thing, of course, about Christ is that he always welcomes children. The disciples tried to drive the mothers and their children away, but of course Jesus loves them and accepts the children and welcomes them and blesses them. And of course the heart of Christ is that every child should be welcomed, every child should be loved, every child should be cared for appropriately, which sadly is not happening in our current society. Thank you for listening.